name's Rachel and today we're talking about The Grace Year by Kim Liggett. I got commissioned to read this book. Thank you for commissioning me, by the way. Even though it was actually a reread because I did read this in 2020, I believe. I want to say January of 2020. I can't remember. It was a long time ago. This is my second time reading it. I really loved it the first time. I still enjoyed it the second time around, but I am a minority and I know that in loving this book. I'm not like a, yeah. So I know that I really like this book and I'm a minority and I know why and I get it. So let's talk about that today. Before we continue, I have to sing thank you for being a friend to my patrons. First to those paying my therapy bills, Eric, Jill, Lex, SJ, Molly, and Zachary. Thank you for being a friend. Today's therapy comes in the form of naps. And to my potato starch Marxists, Aiden, Allison, Anita, Brittany, Caitlin, Carlin, Celia, Chris, CJ, Corey, Diet Goth, Ebby, Eden, Elise, Aaron, Gracie, Horgoose, James, Jen, Jillian, Jules, Kate, Katie O, Quinn, Kylie, Laura, Marcella, Morgan R, Morgan W, Nicole, Paige, Peggy, Ray, Reba, Sammy, Sarah, Shannon, Sean, Talia, and Winter. Thank you all for being a friend. If you want to join Patreon, the link is down below. You get early access, yada yada. And a huge thank you again to AJ for commissioning this video. Okay, so let's talk about this. I completely understand where people are coming from when they say they don't like this. When people call this white-centric, yep, it is that. And it is not intersectional in its feminism. Much like Nature of Witches, I feel that this was mismarketed. So for me, I did not read this from a lens of looking for a feminist story. When I read it, I immediately saw my upbringing in fundamentalist Christianity. So I want to preface this by saying that both takes are valid. If you read this and you're like, this is not the feminist book that I was promised in the marketing, you're right. It's not that. It should not have been marketed that way. And it fails to be a good feminist book. But if you, like me, read it and saw how religion is used to oppress certain groups of people, particularly women and girls. Religion is used to make you feel dangerous yet small, special yet othered, and left you fighting with other girls and women in your vicinity because you were being pitted against each other in a purity competition. That's also valid. I will try to keep this video like completely spoiler free so that you can, you know, engage with the conversation. Let me give you the synopsis. No one speaks of the Grace Year. It's forbidden. In Garner County, girls are told they have the power to lure grown men from their beds to drive women mad with jealousy. They believe their very skin emits a powerful aphrodisiac, the potent essence of youth, of a girl on the edge of womanhood. That's why they're banished for their 16th year to release their magic into the wild so they can return purified and ready for marriage, but not all of them will make it home alive. 16-year-old Tierney James dreams of a better life, a society that doesn't pit friend against friend or women against woman, but as her own Grace Year draws near, she quickly realizes that it's not just the brutal elements they must fear, it's not even the poachers in the woods, men who are waiting for a chance to grab one of the girls in order to make a fortune on the black market. Their greatest threat may very well be each other. With sharp prose and gritty realism, The Grace Year examines the complex and sometimes twisted relationships between girls, the women they eventually become, and the difficult decisions they make in between. So The Grace Year is, it was marketed as like feminine dystopia. It's horror. Like it's a horror book. So I feel like this would have been better marketed as for fans of Wilder Girls because it has similar elements to Wilder Girls, but I think it does what Wilder Girls did but better. Definitely has, in my opinion, a better ending than Wilder Girls. I was so disappointed by that. This is another one of those books where your background, your upbringing are entirely going to color how you see things. In The Grace Year, we have a version of fundamentalist Christianity, and in its like mythology, it differs a little bit from our world's Christianity, but still has like recognizable Christian elements, right? So there's like a version of Eve and Adam and a forbidden fruit, and Eve leading Adam astray and her being the reason why girls and women are, you know, bad. And the whole girls and women having magic thing is really a like take on the whole don't cause your brother to stumble, which I do have a video on down below, where we're taught in fundamentalism that we have the power to affect men and we can't cause our brothers in Christ to stumble, so we need to cover up, dress modestly, act a certain way so that they are not compelled to sin even in their minds. And so this takes that idea that don't cause your brother to stumble thing that we're taught in fundamentalism and expands on it and says that's actually a power that women have. But is it real or is it not real? Like that's the question in the book. And women are constantly being being blamed for leading men astray. Kim Liggett, I don't know her background, but I do know that this is not the first time that she's written about abusive religious communities. So I feel like those of us who can relate to that are probably going to have a better connection to this book, a better reading experience, because we see ourselves reflected in it, than people who are just reading this because they heard it's feminist Lord of the Flies. I am so tired of hearing the phrase feminist Lord of the Flies. Stop it. Stop. I'm so sick of it. I haven't even read Lord of the Flies, but again, I have read Wilder Girls, which was also called feminist Lord of the Flies, and I can tell you that, again, this book is better than Wilder Girls in my opinion. But calling everything feminist blah 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 is misleading. Just because it has a cast of women does not make it feminist. Like, this is where I get upsetty spaghetti with publishers marketing things. I don't really know what the point of Wilder Girls was, to be honest with you, but I know what the point of this book was. I just felt like the abrupt ending of Wilder Girls was a waste of my time and stupid. I like horror like Wilder Girls and like this, but I also like to see a point. A point to having read a whole book. I want to read something that makes me see something in a new way, something that articulates something in a way that I had not thought to put it to words in that way before. And I think that the Grace Year did this in its exploration of certain behaviors in fundamentalist religious communities, while Wilder Girls did not. So like the religious aspect wasn't present in Wilder Girls, right? And I think that the Grace Year, what it got right was a few things, and one of the few things that it got right was its specific portrayal of patriarchal religion and how in those communities women are kept obedient by keeping them ashamed and afraid at all times. And the only power that women ever really have in these communities is this false sense of power that they get when they are comparing themselves to each other and feeling superior, like who's the most pious and pure. There is no camaraderie between women and girls. It's not encouraged whatsoever, at least not in the open, because part of how you are controlled is by being in that purity and piety competition with other women to the benefit of the men in your vicinity. It's sort of similar actually in a way to how CEOs do not want the workers and the working class in general to unionize and organize for better conditions, and instead want them to always be competing with one another for scraps and pats on the back. Like for instance, there's this line in the Grace Year that says, "It's like freedom, but we know it's a lie. This is how they break us. They take everything away, our very dignity, and anything we get in return feels like a gift." Any choices given to women and girls are not really choices at all. They are allowances given by men, and sometimes young men, that benefit men, which I think is why Tierney feels compelled to strike up the particular romance that she strikes up in this book. It probably wouldn't have happened in another life, but in her limited opportunities, that was the only man who Tierney ever saw as an option and was maybe like, I could maybe be with him. There were no other people involved, no other men involved. Her dad, boys in her vicinity, the elders, no other men whatsoever. It was just Tierney making a choice for herself. And so many of us who grew up fundy heard the phrase, make sure you are equally yoked. In fact, I've talked about my experience going to the cult Tres Dias, and I asked while I was there, should I be dating somebody outside of my religion? And their advice to me was to run away. I didn't. I ended up marrying the guy, and we're still together 14 years later. I'm so glad I didn't listen. But the point is, we are told that we need to be equally yoked, which refers to, I forget that I have to explain these things to people who don't grow up fundy. It refers to animals pulling a wagon, I think, and if you are not equally yoked, like the yoke is the thing holding the animals together, if you are not equally yoked, what's the Bible verse this is a reference to? If you are unequally yoked, if you're not, pulling the wagon and you're the same strength of faith, you're not the same religion, your marriage will fail. The literal interpretation of being equally yoked means joined with the same. In agricultural terms, if a yoke joins two oxen together, then they need to be the same in order to work together, otherwise they won't be able to accomplish the goal of farming or tilling the land. If an ox is shorter or weaker than the other, it will be more difficult to work. The Bible says in 2 Corinthians 6:14, do not be yoked together with unbelievers, for what do righteousness and wickedness have in common, or what fellowship can light have with darkness? So every, potential partner is framed within this whole equally yoked thing. So Tierney was able to find somebody who she didn't have to think about that. She was just like, this is a person who I am attracted to. Nobody else is involved. I can just decide whether or not I want to pursue this. That was one of the only times that she was able to ever in her life make a choice just for herself. Another thing that this book does, and it doesn't even have an explicitly stated conversation on this, it showcases the way that men and boys, to varying degrees, especially in Fundyland, all have this sense of righteous paternalism towards girls and young women and even women. They say things like, I'm just trying to protect you, and I'm just doing what's best for you. And it's frustrating because it's so infantilizing towards us, but it's backed by religion. So if we don't comply with that, we are sinning. And even questioning this setup where every man is lording over us, because biblically that's correct, is considered heretical. It shows how little they think that we're actually capable of, and how highly they think of themselves in comparison, how righteous, how much closer to God they think they are in comparison to us. But what's really annoying about this and insidious is that it's not just your pastor, it's not just your teachers at your fundy schools, it's not just the elder men at church who say this shit to you. It's your guy friends, it's your brother, it's your dad, it's your best friend's brother. People who care about you and think that they think highly of you and care for you, you are reminded in this way that they will always think of you as lesser. And when you aren't appreciative of them just doing what's best for you, you're ungrateful, you're sinful, you're ungodly, you're like Eve. And being reminded of that power dynamic and how it reveals that you really have no true allies, because every man in Fundyland is in a position of power over you. You have no true allies. Even the women you can't rely on. It's exhausting and isolating. And seeing so many men doing that to Tierney over and over, men and young men who, yeah, sometimes did the right thing and were not always bad people, it was very revealing because they were still exercising a power dynamic that they were not willing to analyze. Because it shows that within the context of patriarchal, religious, fundamentalist communities, their paternalistic feelings towards you will always be prioritized over your actual human dignity. And I thought that the way that Gracier had that conversation without explicitly having it was quite brilliant. And to give it one last pro, I think the book did a good job of trying to have a conversation on quiet revolutions, the quiet ways that women living under these patriarchal religions find to revolt in their own ways. There isn't too much I can say about this without getting spoilery, but Tierney assumes she's the only one doing this, and she gets frustrated with the women in her community because she's like, well, I'm doing the most. I am doing the revolting the most. When in reality, there were small and large but quiet ways that women do try to reclaim their power under strict fundamentalist religious communities. I think that she's very judgmental to those around her until she realizes that they are doing what they can where they are. It's something that I just don't see depicted very often, and I appreciated it. But I admit that outside of the showcasing of that subculture, that patriarchal religious subculture and its treatment of women, this has issues as a feminist dystopia. It should not have been marketed that way. It was very misleading. I think that they use those two buzzwords in an effect to appeal to a larger variety of readers right now, but all it does is mislead and doesn't actually give the reader what that suggests, what that, is promising. It is not an intersectional book. If this is feminism, it's white feminism, very blatantly. It doesn't do what, say, The Year of the Witching by Alexis Henderson does, although I feel like that's another book that suffered from mismarketing, but in its use of witches, not in its use of anything else. In The Year of the Witching showcases that intersection of Emmanuel, the main character, how being a woman causes this marginalization in this fundamentalist patriarchal religion, but her being a woman of color compounds that. Race is really not ever brought up in the Gracier. It definitely doesn't have a conversation about disability. It has a queer character, or two technically rather, but doesn't really do much to have that conversation. It sort of hints at conversations surrounding class status, but never does hardly anything with that either. By no means would I say that this is a book for teaching intersectional feminism or feminism at all. I don't think it's that. I would say that this is a book great for teaching subjugation of women under fundamentalist religions, and that's about it. And this book and The Year of the Witching have those conversations in a way that other books simply do not. So I wish that this had been marketed like that. Not that I'm advocating for, let's talk about, you know, what Christian nationalism would look like. Like, I'm not saying use that as a marketing term, but be honest that this is for people who want to see religious dystopia. I think that that's a better description for this. I would not call it feminist just because it's about subjugation of women. That's weird. And I can understand, you know, loving this book for that reason. I do. But I can also see that readers understandably want more than just a surface level conversation and examination of women's subjugation. Like, do we really need like feminism 101? Women should be treated equally at this point? Like, no. And unfortunately, if The Grace Year is a feminist book, that's the feminism that it's doing. So if you want a book like The Grace Year but is intersectionally feminist, I would say The Year of the Witching by Alexis Henderson is that. It's horror, it is about a religious community, but it also examines the intersect of race and gender. I think that publishing needs to be a lot less insincere about their marketing, and calling this in every other book XYZ meets The Handmaid's Tale it's getting on my nerves. I want them to, especially as a former Fundy kid, former Fundy woman, I want them to market to those of us who have deconstructed. I feel like that's needed. Anyway, that's a whole tangent. All this to say, there really was an opportunity here, I completely admit, to, if they're gonna market it as a feminist dystopia, make an actually feminist dystopia. Make this into a dystopian where we discuss feminism beyond maybe women have rights. And either Kim didn't want to take that opportunity or that wasn't really her point. Similar to how The Year of the Witching was not really about witches. And people feel understandably misled by that. And it is, in traditional publishing, hard to find books that are actual dystopians doing the work to discuss intersectional feminism that are coming out recently. All of these books that are being promoted as XYZ meets The Handmaid's Tale are not intersectional feminist books. Like, that's not, it's a marketing gimmick. And everything being compared to The Handmaid's Tale, when The Handmaid's Tale is inherently white feminism, it is technically a current or future classic. Sure, but I don't feel like it's really doing much to have discussions about intersectional feminism. And just like I don't recommend reading The Grace Year for feminist dystopia, I instead recommend The Year of the Witching. Instead of reading The Handmaid's Tale, if you're looking for a book that talks about the abuse of reproduction of women and femmes in a patriarchal society, I would instead recommend Future Home of the Living God by Louise Erdrich for a more intersectional take on that idea. Louise Erdrich is a indigenous author, and she's quite brilliant. Just really brilliant. Okay, so prose wise, I will understand if people say the pacing of this is shit. I get it. I don't feel that way subjectively, but both times I have read this book, I have tandem read it in physical and audio, and I've gotten through it in less than a day. But you might not, and that is understandable. I can see people struggling with the pacing of this because it like feels like things are happening so fast in some points, and then some points we're just like really lagging and drawing things out. I get that. There's a lot of grace that I'm willing to give this book, simply because I saw my religious upbringing in it, and I saw quite brilliant ways of discussing certain teachings that I was taught, but like, you know, in a new way. I thought it had like original takes on those ideas, but I acknowledge that that is my bias and the lens through which I view this book, and I can't like take that away. It's hard for me to experience it any other way, but I acknowledge the failure in its depiction of feminism, and I wish that it had been done better, so it could have been, would have been, should have been the book that it was marketed to be, because we do need books like that. So here's the wrap up, okay? As a mostly all girls horror book, it does better than Wilder Girls, okay? As a feminist dystopia, discussing things from an intersectional perspective, I wouldn't recommend The Grace Year at all, but I would recommend The Year of the Witching by Alexis Henderson. And I want everything regarding dystopias that treat women poorly to stop being compared to The Handmaid's Tale, because Future Home of the Living God does a way better job at that story anyway, and not every single book needs to be compared to another for marketing purposes anyway, because a lot of the time it's misleading. If you're a former Fundy kid looking to see your experiences reflected in a book, this is a good choice for that. I think that more men who grew up fundy would benefit from reading this if you're trying to understand what it is that there will always be a wall separating me and my brother because of the power dynamic of Fundyland. There will always be this paternalistic thing rooted in his religion that will always divide us unless he chooses to reckon with it. And I hope one day he does. And I think that for any men who are coming out of Fundyland, this might be helpful to you in understanding your relationship to women who were in your vicinity growing up fundy. But again, The Year of the Witching does that as well while being intersectional. So maybe just read Year of the Witching instead of this. Especially if you like horror. Both these books are good horror books. Wilder Girls is great if you just want horror. Wilder Girls is not having conversation on anything. This is, but The Year of the Witching is, again, doing the conversation and having it better. Okay, that's it. That's all I have to say. Thank you so much for commissioning me to read this. I still really enjoy it, but it is poorly marketed and could have done better in a lot of aspects. So if you don't like this book, fair and valid, completely. Thanks so much for watching. Leave your comments and questions down below. My Ko-fi is down below if you want to tip me, and my Patreon is down below if you want to subscribe to get early access. Okay? Alright, thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye! Alexa, say bye.
Goodbye.